Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Meta, a podcast. This episode is going to be our final installment for our Zelda series, talking about the big kahuna, Ocarina of Time. I'm Paul.
And I'm Jimmy. And if it's your first time tuning in, we are Meta Podcast, where we do meta-analysis of everything. Video games and not video games.
Pretty much everything.
Yeah, every time.
Every time.
It's always everything. Just as a preparation, we're talking about Ocarina of Time, so there will be spoilers. If you haven't played this game, it's old, and you should.
And we would be astonished
as
well, personally.
A lot. If you call yourself a gamer and you haven't played Ocarina of Time, come on.
This is like what we're going to be in our old generations, or when we're older.
20 years from now.
We talk to our grandkids and we're just like, back in my day, we played Ocarina of Time.
You've only played Skyward Sword. All right, so let's hop right in.
Yeah, so this game is, if you could ask anyone, for the most part, Zelda fan, 9 times out of 10, I can guarantee you, they'll say Ocarina of Time is their either most nostalgic Zelda game or their favorite. And I think a lot of that does base off of this whole entire sort of nostalgia factor. Thinking about sort of the trend of video games where they started gaining more momentum and people started having consoles in their home. And I feel like N64 was sort of ahead of, or it was the first staple console to be able to do that, where it was a lot of people had it, essentially.
Yeah.
Some people had PlayStations, kids, maybe they had Super Nintendo or Sega Genesis or something.
Or their parents did, yeah.
Yeah, but everyone
and their fucking mom had an N64.
Pretty much. And so it was only inevitable that a lot of the games on it became very nostalgic. Mario Kart 64, Super Mario 64, Super Smash Brothers, just so many games of it.
Banjo-Kazooie, Donkey Kong 64, Star Fox.
Yeah,
Holy crap.
A bunch of games where people knew, it's what they remember in sort of their childhood. And so Ocarina of Time has this very special place in a lot of people for many reasons. One of the biggest things was its sort of impact on the entire gaming world, where it was, in my opinion, one of the first games to really accomplish this idea of a really immersive, fully developed world. And there was games that did similar things. Super Mario 64 had a similar concept, where it would, you would have sort of this hub world, the castle, and you'd go into different kind of parts of the world or the universe. And so you'd be in a level, but that's sort of how people thought about it. They're like, oh, I'm in this level right now.
Well, yeah, it separated you immediately from anything, because if it wasn't Bob-omb Battlefield, it was a floating castle or island of some sort that was like, this is no way connected to Peach's castle at all. Mm-hmm. I'm just in a different dimension I dropped through in a painting. And all the toads are just like pointless, besides the one that gives me they just stand there. Whereas all the characters and everybody in Ocarina of Time is fleshed out, written character.
And going from across the entire map was something that it wasn't just dropping through a painting or some portal or something.
You had to go.
Yeah, there was many ways to get there, and it was all part of this complete world or level, however you want to think about it. And in my opinion, it was really one of the first games to do this, and that kind of created this very, this feeling of wonder almost, as it's something that really hadn't been touched on or accomplished on to that degree in a 3D environment.
Oh yeah, because in 2D Zeldas, like the first one and Link A Link to the Past, because it felt. Or at least the first one, you can do all the dungeons in backwards order and fucking beat the 8th dungeon first if you're crazy. But it's there were the obvious obstacles in your way in Ocarina of Time that they didn't feel like obstacles though, because you're like, oh, I'm not well equipped enough to fucking take on Death Mountain. So it didn't feel like you were being restricted in your gameplay. It was just I'll get there eventually.
And I think this was definitely complemented because if you think about other Zelda games, prior to that, 2D Zelda games, if you wanted to get advice on where to go next or what you should be doing, there was usually some person somewhere in the map you could talk to. And like, it was like the sage or whatever.
Except in Zelda 2.
Yeah.
When they just throw you in and they're like, oh, you better get that thing under the table.
But in A Link to the Past, there was like the sage in the sanctuary you could talk to, and he's like, "Oh, well, yeah," or like, "Yeah, but you had to kind of go out of your way to do that if you're like, "Oh, dude, I'm lost. Where do I go?"
Right.
And Ocarina of Time, even though a lot of people, I mean, the endless memes and tropes that have been generated.
Hey, listen.
Yeah, it was made complete by Navi. Who was able to just be there at a moment's notice where you're like, oh shit, where am I going again? And then you would just, oh hey, just press up on the C button there, and you would get your direction.
Yeah. And everyone who played Ocarina of Time for the first time hadn't played it before, so they weren't like, oh, I know exactly what to do. Navi's so annoying. It was like, I need Navi to live.
Yeah, exactly. And
I can't progress without Navi.
And the game was able to not break immersion as a result then, because you're like, oh, I'm on this quest right now, but hold up, I gotta shoot back over to the Eastern Palace to talk to and figure out what I need to do. You could just keep going, and if you weren't sure or you forgot, you could just check right there and then keep on going without having to leave the area you were in.
Yeah. And if you were progressing at like a standard rate, Navi wouldn't bother you except to tell you like new stuff, really. Mm-hmm. She'd be like, oh, there's a fucking Skulltula over there, and
a Skulltula.
Remember to use Z to She would tell you that a bit too much, regardless of how much you played the game.
Because if you Z-target any monster, it was she'd be like, it's just monster.
You can do that.
Yeah. Which also as well, I think that's also an important part to touch on was what this game accomplished in terms of combat in a 3D environment.
Yeah.
Like I said, you had Super Mario 64 kind of touched on it, but you can people can remember how just various times when you play Super Mario 64 and you're like, I just need to hit this fucking thing, and it's just either elusive or you start to throw the punch and you're not totally lined up and you're like, I'm just fucking missing, and it's really frustrating.
You can basically sum up how bad the combat in Mario 64 is by just saying throwing Bowser into a spike ball.
Yeah, exactly.
No, it doesn't work. It doesn't work.
But the game was able to really look at that problem and sort of adapt to it. And
no, it felt more like a 3D world because in Mario, again, it's like jumping and punching and diving. They were all things you could do. I mean, the punching was the real combat thing in Mario 64, but it's the diving and all the other stuff was just a means to an end of getting around and having fun in the game. Mm-hmm. It just happened to also kill Goombas. So it's I bet one they were just coding it and they're like, oh cool, he dove into that Goomba and died, and it's making an attack.
They probably, I think also as well, it could be a testament to how the controller itself was, right? It didn't have two joysticks to be able to one for looking around. Yeah, it was just the one. If you thought about other games on the N64, fucking GoldenEye, how did you, the idea of trying to shoot someone in a 3D space?
I know, strafing, I'm so glad dual sticks exist. Strafing is one of the worst things ever.
But but back to the topic at hand was, Ocarina of Time really took that idea and, made it something fluid where it didn't ruin the game or make it super simplified, but it also didn't make it extremely frustrating either to play. And so I think there's just a lot of obstacles and hurdles that existed for Ocarina of Time when going into the development of it, but they had enough data to think about it and try to come up with a solution. And I think that's where a lot of points they succeeded.
Yeah, and if you think about it, when you do lock onto an enemy, it goes into the letterbox, and you're kind of and he moves cool, and if you're spatially aware of where you are on the map, you most of the times won't fall off or run into spikes or something. But I mean, that always happens, but it was still like you were zoomed in and the camera followed where you were attracted to attacking or otherwise, and then when you killed that or it got out of range, it turned off, and you're like, oh, okay, I completely understand this mechanic now.
Yeah.
And it was the basis of the whole game, so I mean, it worked.
Yeah, and so I think when thinking about it now, as from a nostalgic point of view, as a kid who hasn't or wasn't really exposed to that degree of, like, by that standard at the time of sort of like mechanical soundness and
Right.
just what have you, it was really something else. Like, it really, I believe, immersed the players in that environment and really left this impression where it was like, oh my god, like, this game is amazing.
It's true. For being so light on actually, I mean, for being an RPG, but being so light on, like, what people would call an RPG nowadays.
It's more like a dungeon explorer.
Exactly. See, I mean, it is an RPG. It's just, the story carries itself and the character grows, but I mean, you always reach the same endpoint. So it's not like, I've chosen my role. I'm thief. I'm Thief Link, and it's like it's 100% not that, but it still works to immerse you as Link, the fucking savior of Hyrule.
And I think really what I always appreciate about most Zelda games, but I think Ocarina of Time really how it played out and how Link sort of like the mannerisms, what makes Link sort of this more, I guess, attractive hero in terms of like people wanting to
put
like
themselves in his shoes.
Exactly, and it's because Link doesn't have necessarily like there's a motive for Link doing things, but the reason why that motive exists is imprinted by the player itself.
Right.
And because Link is sort of like the silent hero, those impressions are totally permissible because like there's no objection to it. There's nothing that happens in the game where it's like, I don't know if that's like Link would really do that. It's like, well, no, like Link could do that because like we know what his end goal is, but his motivations, that's solely dictated by the player. And so I think there was also the game was very connective on that scale and level where people felt more a part of the game than they had in other games, essentially.
Well, yeah, if I recall, I haven't played it in a while, but the few yes/no options you're given in the game, where yes is the clear choice of like, yes, I'll help you, Princess Zelda,
and no is let's listen to this fucking owl 4 times over, because why would you default no as your fucking response?
Also that. No, but like when you're saying no in a cutscene and Zelda's like, stop playing around or something, so it like... Obviously, the choice doesn't exist. It's not a fucking branching path Mass Effect bullshit. It's straight up, you have to choose yes to progress the game. And why would you choose no anyways? You're a kid. And
I don't know what the fuck you're doing.
Seriously, I mean, whatever age you're playing the game, you are tiny Link. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter how old you are when you play the game. You're always a child.
Yeah. And what I absolutely love about this game too is that a lot of people, it's their nostalgic Zelda game because I feel it's where like this sort of hurdle existed, and like it was just so easily cleared that it just left such a mark on players to be like, wow, this game is amazing. One of the big things though about it is that it seems. Granted, there was Link's Awakening, which we talked about our first episode, and we highly praised it because it had a lot of storytelling element to it that wasn't really there in Zelda 1, 2, or even A Link to the Past. But at the same time, not a ton of people had played Link's Awakening, who, like I said, because Link's Awakening came out at a time when, having a Game Boy or having a console was not common.
Yeah.
And so...
It's a privilege.
Yeah, and so for N64 to become way more accessible and then to have Ocarina of Time happen, it really brought people into this idea of, like, video games can be sort of the storytelling... It can be storytelling, essentially.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be just like, oh, really good mechanics or really beautiful art or music.
Or baseless fun, Centipede, Pac-Man.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
It's
There is no story. There is a story. We have writers in this game in the credits. There is a story.
Yeah, and so when a while back, growing up, I always loved Ocarina of Time, and in high school, this had to be in like 2008 or something like that. I had a friend of mine, my friend Rio, and we were both Zelda fans. It's what we kind of bonded around when we first met each other. We decided, we were thinking about it, going, is Ocarina of Time like actually a good game? Because we were thinking about...
You had your retrospective.
Yeah, we had that moment where we're like, are we just getting really blinded by nostalgia and it's like actually just this terrible game? Because if you think about the surface of the game, it's sort of this like very...
clunky?
Not clunky, but it seems like a very standard story. Like, princess gets kidnapped.
Hero's tale.
Yeah, go save the princess. Yeah.
Parabola of event
evil.
climax to lull and defeat.
Mm-hmm. And so, defeat the evil. And so we went back and played it, and we actually have a notebook where we took notes of like every interaction in the game to try and piece together the story of Ocarina of Time.
The nerdiest notebook of all time.
It is. It's great. It was like 11 pages of like single line, full length like notes.
I've seen it. It's amazing.
And there was a lot of things that Ocarina of Time did in its story that a lot of people will obviously just playing the game will like know about. One of the biggest things it did was its whole entire plot twist of spoiler time travel.
I said spoilers in the beginning.
Yeah,
We're good.
okay, sorry, my bad. Of time travel, which was not really touched on in games at this point. This idea of like, you get the Master Sword and you're like, oh, dude, like Master Sword, this is it, and you grab it, and then it's like,
it does the whole.
You wake up and you're like 7 years
Thinking
later.
back though, I think the only thing Link does when he's like older is he like kind of like checks himself out a little bit. It's like a 2-second like animation.
It does like he like looks over
and
his
he's like,
shoulders.
all right, let's go. And you're like, how is this? I mean, of course, time probably passed differently for him as like a kid, and like he probably lived all those years in the
Sacred Realm.
Mm-hmm. Whereas the player's just like, he's just 7 years older. But like Link was just like sitting there like, I guess I'm not ready yet. They had to stitch him the new tunic the whole time.
But what was God, and like also another thing I really loved about it too was it kind of introduced this idea that a lot of Zeldas now draw from, is this idea of this continuous item that sort of represents the character, and not like, oh, the badass sword or something, or the like iconic shield, but this really binding element that brings like the concept of the game to life. And in this case, it was the Ocarina of Time, and the focus it has on that, and like the interactiveness of like playing songs to like at certain points in the story to progress the story, and just other cool shit like that.
Yeah,
where
just the whole mechanic of the songs and finding new songs and using the songs to make frogs grow
or like teleport across the map, or
and all of them were really cool, and like the animations were always cool, and you could always not play a song and just riff, but when you play the game, you're always like, I have a goal, I'm gonna play this song and then I'm gonna do it, and but as a kid, I mean, when I was younger and I'd play it and I didn't really have a goal of what to do in Ocarina of Time, I'd just be like, because I think you could pitch shift in.
Yeah, you could. Yeah,
because I remember doing that in Majora's Mask a lot, but I remember doing it in Ocarina of Time too, because you're just like, it was fun.
And it was, oh man, what I love about that point in the game too was like, you get the Ocarina of Time as a kid and like Zelda's running away and you're like, oh dude, like I'm gonna go get the Master Sword and I'm gonna defeat this fucking evil. Like, right. Ganondorf, like, you're fucking toast. And then you get it and you wake up as an adult and you're like, wait a minute. And then I think it's just this crazy, like, shock factor. If you when players first had that and you walk out and you're like, the first thing you see is like the Death Mountain in the background, and it's
all
like
fucked up again.
Yeah, like this crazy like glowing ring of smoke, and you're like, what?
And just the wind sound and the
it's
crows.
super decrepit.
Yeah, and you're like, this isn't good.
Yeah, you walk out into like Hyrule Courtyard or like into Castletown, and it's just like redeads everywhere, and you're like, what? And it's like the second time in the game you've encountered redeads if you got the Sun Song earlier.
Yeah.
So you're just like,
You're like half expecting, dun, 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 but it's just like, and you're like, no.
It also had these like really like, because that's like one of those moments where like the game takes this like dark shift. And what I really love about this game, and this is probably like one of the more unknown things about Ocarina of Time, is like in the little time sequence between when you first get the Ocarina going into Castletown. Like most players are like, I gotta fucking book it to Temple of Time and get this Master Sword. But if you go into the alley streets in Castletown, there's a soldier who's dying on like he's like against the wall, sitting down, and he's like talking about how he tried to hold Ganondorf off to buy Zelda time, and then like he just dies there, and when you try to interact with him again, it's just like he's not moving.
And you're like, oh, cool.
Yeah, and so
just
like
taking a nap.
Yeah, so like because like a lot of people are like get the rush of like, I gotta get the Master Sword right now, like I can't afford to explore like this instant. And then you get to, but it's this sort of idea that like the game's about to take this darker turn.
I wonder if there's more like events triggered by that cutscene, because I know of that one, but I wonder if like other people in Castletown like are like, did you see that shit?
Yeah,
like,
you're like, I don't want to fucking talk to people.
Yeah, I mean, because I remember that soldier, but like I'm always like, booking it. I'm going to the Temple of Time. I got this. Because, I mean, and once you played the game, you're like, I got this. The whole game is always the same. I can do this. But there's always something new to discover.
Yeah. And so, like, and then that entire scene happens where, like, you become an adult. And I remember when I was going through my noted playthrough, there was a moment where Raru, the Light Sage, who greets you there, is talking about how, like, the Master Sword is the... it's the seal between Hyrule and the Sacred Realm, and it's the sword of evil's bane, and evil can never touch the sword, and it picks its master. And I had this moment, like, when I was taking these notes where I'm like, wait a minute. Because it kind of just seemed like, when you first read it, you're like, all right, standard fucking gameplay, lore creating story, whatever.
Sword good, evil bad.
Yeah, exactly. And so, like, oh, only hope. And then I had this realization that struck me when I'm like, wow, wait, doesn't that mean if they just never took the sword, everything, like, there was no
That's why it's such a cool item.
Yeah.
Because it has so much impact on the game existing.
Yeah, and so it's this crazy thing where I was like, wait a minute, is this kind of like a writer's error? Like, were they just trying to make the sword sound really cool and overlooked this tiny detail? And so, and it's like, but a lot of players, I think, just sort of skim over this idea, like, they don't fully process it, or like the impacts of that, like, that text.
Right, they're like, I have to get the Master Sword.
Yeah, they're like, well, I have to get, like, that's the part of the game. I have to beat the evil. Of course I have to take this sword. And
so you could just put it back.
Yeah, right, like, we're calling it good.
And then the game is over.
Yeah. And I'm like, wait a minute. And so, you continue on with the game and everything of the sort. And as you get to the end of the game, and what's great about it is, like, you beat Ganon and everything, and Zelda has this moment where, like, you two, like, you look like you're in the sky almost. It's just this, like, blue background with, like, clouds drifting by, and she's, like, trying to explain how, as a kid, when you first show up and meet her in the courtyard, she's like, I had this, like, vision, you're the boy from my dream who, like, saves the world kind of thing. Like, we need to get these spiritual stones, because at the time, Ganondorf was in, like, not league with the king, but he was allies with King Hyrule, because quote unquote. But Zelda's like, I see through him, like, he's trying to get into the Sacred Realm because Hyrule, the royal family of Hyrule, are the, like, chosen by the goddesses to defend the Sacred Realm.
Look, his skin is green. I'm not being racist. He's a different skin color.
God.
And you're like, Zelda, you have to calm down. I think Ganondorf is a very respectable gentleman.
Yeah, and so everyone is just like, she's like, no, you have to believe me. And so later on in this cutscene, after you beat Ganon, it's the end of the game, she's like, yeah, it's because I tried to control the Sacred Realm that all of this happened to begin with. And it's like, this, like,
Okay.
And people kind of like, I think it's also, if you didn't connect the first dot when you first got the Master Sword, and they make this point, like a lot of people just kind of skim over this context too. They're like, oh, okay, yep, like it's just the bridge of being like, everything is going to go back to normal now. But in reality, what it is, she then plays the Song of Time, and it's her admitting the fact of this earlier point that I thought was a writer's error at the time, which was, I made a mistake, and if we had done nothing, everything would have been fine.
Her naivete was the downfall of Hyrule.
Yeah, exactly. And so she sends you back in time to go and essentially not do that. And so what's crazy about it is, you go through the credits and everything, and the final scene of the game is Link walking into the courtyard.
The portrait of Mario.
In the window and shit. And you walk into the courtyard, and Zelda turns around, and it's obvious the first meeting that you guys have, and she looks super astonished when you first met her earlier in the game.
Yeah.
And she
you're this grizzled fucking war vet. You have a full satchel of bombs.
And you're like, come with me if you want to live.
Sunglasses and helicopters off. But it's actually just the owl.
Yeah, just
and a
but the game then it goes into a still frame, and then it just says the end, Ocarina of Time. And at this point, this is one of the favorite things that happens to me in storytelling as well, is when the entire story you're being told has already happened. And that's essentially what Ocarina of Time is. It was this sort of, if I dare say, this meta storytelling that was going on. The entire game has already transpired. The entire game is actually just Link telling Zelda when he first meets her about why they should not do the plan that she thinks is best for Hyrule.
That's my favorite point that you bring up whenever you talk about this. I'm just imagining Link being all right, sit down, Zelda.
Yeah, because the entire thing is he just walks in, and she's like, you're the boys from my dream. He's like, shh.
He's like,
and he's like, let me tell you what's going to happen if we do this.
So good.
And that's why the ending then makes sense. Why it goes to a still frame is because that's the end of Link's story. Because he tells the entire thing yep, I get the pendants. We open up the door. Hyrule gets totally fucked because the Master Sword turns out that thing's a seal to the Sacred Realm.
It's very important.
Ganondorf can't get in if it's there. So if we literally, and then I have to go and through all the Fire Temple, get this hammer.
You're so many fucking coins. I don't even know.
Yeah, this shitty water temple. Why is there a fucking water temple to begin with? Because fuck water temples. Always.
Zora's in the water temple.
And he goes through that entire thing, and he ends it with and so you sent me back here right now to stop this from happening. We're just gonna
sits down
we're just gonna do nothing. And it's this crazy thing because then it's so here I am right now in the courtyard telling you this story, and so the story ends with him being him walking in and being yep, and then I walked into the courtyard and I told you this story. And so you get to the still there, and it says end, and it's this realization that this has already happened. All of this has happened, and it's just Link recalling the story to Zelda in an attempt to dissuade her from going through with the plan she
Hopefully
dreamt.
It works.
Yeah, and
she doesn't walk over to Kokiri Forest or village and
just does it herself.
You're in green. You're the hero.
You're coming with
the
me.
The guy lifting rocks is like me.
Sorry, boss. And I mean I think this whole entire storytelling element introduced so much, because this is the sort of quintessential Zelda game where we get things such as split timeline theory, which threw this world into chaos of being people being oh no, that split timeline isn't a thing.
Real.
And then people who I'm totally a split timelineer, I am all about that. Who are yes,
it's a conspiracy theory to not be split.
But the impact that's had on the rest of Zelda games, and kind of how it eventually led Nintendo to be here's an official timeline to sort of quell everyone.
Settle it.
Yeah, settle it all. And it's kind of cool thinking about how if you play a Zelda game and if it's in a certain timeline, the kid timeline or the adult timeline, how that impacts the way we look at it. And so for me, I play Twilight Princess, and I know Twilight Princess is in the kid timeline, where Ganon doesn't destroy Hyrule.
Right.
Because if you think about it, like the Deku Tree, there's no Deku Tree in the Kid timeline, which makes sense because it dies.
Yep.
It doesn't get reborn in like it does in the adult timeline, so there's no Deku Tree. But the interesting thing is like there's a lack of, the royal family was the guardians of the sacred realm. That's sort of like what they establish in Ocarina of Time when they're first talking about the goddesses. And a lot of it like kind of goes down to this thing where like, wait, why is the Master Sword supposed to be in the Temple of Time? Why is the Temple of Time destroyed in Twilight Princess? And why was Ganondorf like enslaved? Like, wasn't he an ally to the king? And you can just draw these like ideas being like, oh, well, maybe what happened was like Ganondorf attacked Hyrule after getting impatient that the Sacred Realm wasn't opening,
right.
and then like destroyed it. It got rebuilt, but he got captured and like they imprisoned him.
But if it was in the adult timeline, you'd be like, this doesn't make too much sense.
Yeah, so it's like, but we can draw these conclusions. And also just like another thing as well, going off of Ocarina of Time, just like building off, one thing it does amazing as well, which I appreciate about games, is like, it's cool, the idea of having a massive world is really cool.
Yeah.
What's not cool is when you have a massive world and there's not much to like see. And I mean, not really trying to bash on any game noise, guys. But
shit.
oh god,
Oh god.
Sorry, cough.
I mean, there's so many games that you could say.
Yeah,
like
that
at this
do
point,
that,
like Grand Theft Auto games, there's a lot to do in them, but their maps are huge now, and there's like, oh well, there's 16 horse stops all the way up fucking Ocean Avenue. And
yeah, like fucking Assassin's Creed does that too.
Yeah,
they're like, all right, cool. Let me go to another section of the map and just do the exact same thing.
collect some flags or something.
Oh, cool, a feather from my dying brother.
Yeah,
like,
not important.
Yeah, and so, but what's great about Ocarina of Time is that it's a big enough world. It's still like relatively small compared to these other worlds.
There's gonna be a place in Hyrule or like where you'll sit there in like the field and you're like, I'm bored. There's nothing to do in this one spot. But it's like, get over your fucking self. There's a hole over there. There's a giant spinning whirligig fucking knife.
Pineapple
yeah,
thing.
fucking pineapple man.
Pineapple.
And fucking go ride Epona up in the stables. Or I mean, there's so much to do like relatively close. And I don't know, like fucking Watch Dogs was fucking a nightmare of nothing.
It's just, but it's a tiny attention to detail that really, I think, defines a well-developed game. Where, it's not the biggest map, but it's not about the size. It's not quantity, it's quality.
It is what worries me about the new Breath of the Wild, because you're like 9 times bigger than Skyrim, and it's like, so you're saying I have to like ride a horse for like 9 minutes to do anything important? You're like, no. I don't want to do it.
Yeah, and so a big that's a huge. I think that's a good concern.
It's a balance.
Yeah, and so being able, whenever someone's like, we have a huge map, it's like that could be
great.
It could be really good if there's a lot to do. Like if there's so much content in like areas that it doesn't feel redundant or it doesn't feel scarce. And it's like then produces high quality gameplay.
Yeah, I feel like Saints Row 4 actually did that pretty well. There's a lot of good examples of that.
Yeah, exactly.
A lot of bad examples too.
Mm-hmm. And
there's a lot of games.
Yeah, and a lot of one of the biggest things I think, like this tiny attention to detail, is sort of Kakariko Village has this, and because not a lot of people really know it, but if you talk around in Kakariko Village, you find out that it used to be a Sheikah only village, and there's this guy in Castletown he refers to Sheikah as the shadow folk who do the royal family's bidding.
He's racist.
And
I don't like the shadow folk.
Shadow folk.
They're Sheikah. Oh my god.
But
he's
on,
old. Don't worry.
Come on, dude. Just come on, man. It's not that hard.
Dude, he's old. It's fine.
Yeah. And so, but you kind of piece these things together where the Sheikah are sort of just like the secret police of the royal family. They do the royal family's bidding. And Kakariko Village used to be a Sheikah-only village until its leader, Impa, went to become a guardian for Zelda. But you think about it, you're like, well, Zelda's 10 years old? So really, Kakariko Village has only been open to the public for 10 years.
Right.
And it makes sense that it was a Sheikah-only village. That's where the royal family is buried, so you'd want someone to be able to protect it. And then also as well, I I think the fine detail it involves this like extra layer of thinking is the well that exists there.
Oh god.
And you go to the well, there's a sign out there. It says like deep. It's like wet, dark, deep, and it's like do not enter kind of thing. And then after every middle school kid's like, oh, good one, bro, because it's just some metaphor for sex.
Right. No. It's a horrible, horrible well.
Yeah, and you go in there and you're like, okay, well, it's obviously this evil presence is here. But then you think about it like Bongo Bongo, the Shadow Temple boss, he was imprisoned in the well. He was sealed there by some Sheikah power because, I mean, when you go and Sheik knows about it. And then another thing as well is like when you're exploring there as a kid, there's a bunch of there's cages, there's these like crucifixions essentially.
Oh yeah.
And what's crazy is like
the wood posts.
The wood post crucifixions. If you go like towards them, it falls into like an invisible hole in the ground.
Oh yeah.
It leads into this pit that's filled with like redeads and stuff.
Yeah, and like skulls in the wall and acid.
Yeah, and there's like the dead hand, the mini boss in there, and then you're like, it kind of pieces all these together where you're like, wow, the well is sort
He's
of.
He's not in the bottom level.
He isn't not in the bottom level. No, he's
down.
the end boss of like the well. But
he's
in the well. But this idea that the well is this sort of like torture chamber that the Sheikah knew about because there was the sign outside, and you're like, well, what kind of things were they trying in here? Like, because why is this dead hand boss here? Like, it didn't just show up here. Like, someone either made it or like put it in here. Like, Bongo Bongo was imprisoned in here. And then even more so to kind of seal on this fact is like, what do you find in the well? Like, what's the item of significance? It's the lens of truth.
Sherlock Holmes up in this bitch.
Which is this like Sheikah item to be able to see the truth. And another fun thing too is you have like the gossip stones all around Hyrule, which have the Sheikah symbol on it. And when you can talk to someone in Castletown who talks about the gossip stones, and if you hit them or whatever, to the normal eye, they're like, oh, boing, boing, the time is blah, blah, blah.
But if you bomb them, they turn into a rocket.
Like, most interesting, like, why the fuck, like, who was there like, just fucking make it fly.
Yeah, whatever.
Like, some developer was like, just... if someone hits
put
with a
rocketry
bomb,
in this game. Someone code rocketry.
But interesting enough is if you have the Mask of Truth, the Gossip Stones will tell you things, and the Mask of Truth is also a Sheikah item.
It has the same symbol on it.
It has the same symbol on it, and it was used by the Sheikah, and the Gossip Stones report on what they've heard, and so it's kind of this idea that like, wow, dude, the Sheikah were kind of like the NSA equivalent. Like they could have these stones
like the FBI, CIA, all in one.
Yeah, like they had these stones that people that would listen around and tell like.
If you had the right credentials, they would tell you what you
they've heard. Yeah, and so it's this like way, but then like the average Joe would interact with it, and it's like, here's the time, and they're like, oh, okay, it's just a clock or some shit, and so it was kind of this detail where if you like. You just can play through the game. You're like, okay, Gossip Stones, and you don't pay them any attention.
Yeah, it is definitely easily overlooked.
Yeah, but you put I think that meta analysis into it, and mic drop, and then you can really start to piece together like the amount of detail, small detail, like the developers put into this game, and it really shows like the care that when the developers made it, they're like, we want this game to be amazing.
Yeah.
And so when I think about it, and I look back and I go, is Ocarina of Time an amazing game, or is it just nostalgia factor? Hands down, it's a fucking amazing game with an amazing story that I think a lot of people overlook.
There's aspects of it that give you the nostalgia blinders, like Water Temple and all that stuff. But I mean, again, I think we've said this a lot when we've been talking about games. Is like instead of, I mean, we always look at specific parts of a game, soundtrack, world map, everything like that, but then when it comes down to it, is the full game fun? Is it a good game? And then like with what we know, breaking it apart, we piece it all back together and we're like, oh shit, yeah, it kind of is.
Yeah, because if you can look at it, like if you start looking from it as a big picture, you're like, okay, well here's kind of what the game's about or whatever. But then you take the time to appreciate all the little tiny details in it and all the small things, and you start to realize like, oh shit,
Sorry.
this is like this is actually like so fucking amazing. Like the amount of tiny detail, and then being able to make that flow, like by having things like Navi, which prevents you from like having to leave an area you've already maybe like parsed like or halfway of it already, right. And some, like you're like, oh, okay, cool, I know where I need to go. Like I just passed that area. I'll just go quickly like back trail.
And the owl is a good quarter marker. It gives you little tidbits of the story and greets you at different parts in the game, but it's not following you around and fucking press C to hear a long story and then hit no.
It shows
you
up
just
like,
have
what,
Navi
3 times or
yeah,
something?
it's like 3 or 4 times, and you can ride it down the mountain whenever you want. But it's like it's not a fucking block in the road stopping you. Mm-hmm. And it's also not the cool owl from Link's Awakening that fucking dastardly owl,
conniving owl.
Yeah, it's just he's there. He's kind of Sahasrara. He gives you some he's a good world builder. He's like, oh hey, welcome. Hey, this is a field. Hey,
welcome.
I'm an owl. Do you want to hear any of this again? Okay, so I'm flying off now. And you're like, did I just? Is that an owl? I didn't even. But yeah, no, it's a good mix of you have Navi there if you ever need her, and she'll be annoying sometimes, and you have the owl to be annoying those one specific times. But again, when you're playing the game the first time, I'm sure you like actually read it if you're into it. You read what the owl said. I haven't read what the owl said in fucking years, so I wouldn't even. I would probably the next time I played, I'd be like, oh, he actually has some good insight that I should have listened to.
Listen.
But you don't have to do that, so it all works out really to a full game experience.
Mm-hmm. And and so looking back at it, I think this game was such an important milestone in establishing like the Zelda universe and sort of the significance of it. And it set like such a high bar for, I think, games in general. I think when people look back and it's like, tell me some really good games that happened like late 90s. Like, guarantee you, like, Ocarina of Time is always going to be up there.
Yeah.
Like,
and things that it inspired or mechanics from it in games later are like, yes, these games used things from Ocarina of Time that are a good game mechanic, a good storytelling objective, something like that.
Yeah.
Where it's like, yes, that is present in these games. And like, I mean, even Majora's Mask, we talked about it. It's like, it's literally kind of a sequel, and it uses basically the same assets of Ocarina of Time, but makes a completely different story and gameplay wise. I mean, it's pretty much the same, but it's such a different experience.
And it also like it developed characters while not really developing them. Right. If that makes sense. It's just
they weren't one-sided one-liners. It was like it didn't develop characters or Ocarina of Time didn't develop characters as much as Majora's Mask because they didn't have as much dialogue and missions with them and stuff like that. But they didn't feel flat. Like as soon as you meet, who's the sleeping guy, Malin or
Talon?
Talon, one of the fat Mario guy.
Yeah, Talon.
Like
I think.
He's immediately like a memorable character, and he has like 2 lines and a chicken game. Like that's it. And then you wake him up later, and he runs back. But it's like he's barely a character, and he's a very memorable part of Ocarina of Time.
Yeah.
So it's like they took the care into crafting these not just visually distinct, but like their attitudes and the writing for them.
And the mannerisms.
Yeah, and they're all animated differently, and they're either like slow and flowy or like...
God, and it's like, it was also such a, like, accompanied by such an amazing soundtrack. Like you can name off so many things, like so many songs about that, like from that game that are just so memorable. Like off the bat, Song of Time, Song of Storms, Bolero of Fire, Gerudo Valley, like
Lost Woods.
Like there you go, Saria's song. Like just right there, just like 5 songs that you're like, yep, these were really good songs in that game.
It's even more impressive from them, or I guess who is it? Kido or Yoji? What is this?
Koji Kondo.
I was getting there. Yeah, it's like, I mean, he made the music for the first game, and so he just built on that, and then with the given hardware and the given like MIDI sounds and stuff like that. He made this amazing soundscape and soundtrack that to this day they still are like, yeah, we're gonna sample this from Ocarina of Time or whatever. It's like you're like, you're playing Wind Waker, you're playing any Zelda game, you're like, yep, that is 100% from Ocarina of Time.
Oh, there's Saria's song, or like even I think one of the big ones too, Zelda's Lullaby.
Oh yeah, that became more of a theme.
Like what in Skyward Sword, like the entire, which blows my mind to this day.
The Goddess's song is
that the Skyward Sword theme is just Zelda's Lullaby played like if you play it backwards, it's legit Zelda's Lullaby, and that just like,
and you're like, that could be seen as cutting corners, but it's like, it's a completely different song, and it gives a completely different
and it's just
meaning and feeling to it.
It's so amazing. I absolutely love that.
Yep.
But I think just over this past like episode here, like
series,
like looking back as sort of the story of Zelda, but also just kind of the impact it has and how much it's influenced and drawn influence in the gaming world and outside of that is just so profound. And I don't think there could be I don't think 5 episodes of a series is, even though that's what we're capping this at.
It's not doing it a complete justice for sure, and we know that. Mm-hmm. We can only talk about. I mean, there's so many Zelda games we haven't. I mean, we're not gonna have time to make episodes of, or we'll touch on them later. Or something. But it's definitely like, I feel like 5 is a good way to kind of get people hyped up about, I don't know,
Breath of
the Wild or. Because I would definitely do an episode on that one, when we've actually played it and we're like, this game or this game. so, yeah, I mean, of course we're not doing it justice, but
it's a good thin slice of what is like Zelda and what does it represent.
Yeah, there's only so much analysis we can bring in without rehashing sequelitis or people who have done analysis of the game. I mean, it's been out for so long now. There's so many podcasts and videos and movies and everything. I mean, it's had such a huge impact on the gaming community. We're not the first ones to do this, but thanks for giving us the opportunity to blab at you about these games.
Mm-hmm, for sure. And if you like our content and you want to hear more of stuff, always feel free to let us know. Comments, Twitter, Facebook. We're on those medias.
Yeah, we'll be doing more stuff on different social media, like YouTube and stuff. But we're on iTunes as well, so you can subscribe to us on there if you have an iPod. I guess we should do stuff on the Google Play Store if people want to listen to us on like Android. I don't know.
Yeah.
There's so many platforms now. It's hard to reach everybody without alienating somebody. But that's just how the way the cookie crumbles.
Yeah, and so I think with that, we're going to draw it to an end for our Zelda series, finishing it up with the big one, Ocarina of Time.
Yeah. We went out of time. We did Majora's Mask last episode. Whoa, that came out after
Ocarina of Time.
I know, but we did Majora's Mask last episode and then Ocarina of Time this episode.
We
played the Song of Time and we went back and now we're here. Thanks for joining us. You've been meted. Have a good one.
Peace out.
Bye.
Bye.